The humid air of camp hung thick as Commander Sarah Martinez stepped out of her staff car, her crisp naval uniform bearing the gold oak leaves that marked her as a senior officer. At 38, she had earned every stripe, every commendation, and every star through years of dedication, sacrifice, and excellence that few could match. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her posture spoke of someone accustomed to command. Sarah had arrived at the joint training facility for what was supposed to be a routine inspection of the new inter-service cooperation protocols. The Pentagon had been pushing for better coordination between the Navy, Army, Marines, and Special Operations Forces, and Sarah had been tasked with evaluating the progress. Her background in naval intelligence and logistics made her uniquely qualified for this assignment, though she knew that some in the military still questioned whether women belonged in positions of authority. The training compound buzzed with activity as various units went through their exercises. Marines practiced urban warfare scenarios, Army personnel worked on vehicle maintenance, and in the distance, she could see a group of Navy SEALs conducting water-based training operations. The sight should have filled her with pride. These were some of America's finest warriors. But Sarah knew from experience that not everyone would welcome her presence with open arms. As she made her way toward the main administrative building, Sarah's aide, Lieutenant Jessica Torres, fell into step beside her. Jessica was young, barely 25, but sharp as a tack and fiercely loyal to her commanding officer. She carried a tablet containing the day's schedule and briefing materials. "Ma'am, the first briefing is scheduled for 900 hours, Jessica said quietly. Colonel Henderson from the Marine contingent will be presenting the tactical coordination updates, followed by Major Williams from the Army Logistics Division. Sarah nodded, checking her watch. They had 15 minutes to settle in and review the morning reports. As they approached the building, she noticed a group of SEALs finishing their morning PT session nearby. Their instructor, a tall man with the kind of build that spoke of years of intense physical training, was dismissing them with sharp commands that carried across the courtyard. Petty Officer First Class Tank had been with SEAL Team 6 for 8 years. At 32, he was considered one of the most experienced operators in his unit, with multiple deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, and several classified operations that had earned him a chest full of medals. Tank stood 6'3", weighed 220 pounds of solid muscle, and had the kind of confidence that came from knowing he could handle any situation the military could throw at him. Tank had grown up in rural Texas, where traditional views about gender roles were still deeply ingrained in the culture. His father had been a Marine, his grandfather a soldier in World War II, and Tank had been raised with the belief that combat and military leadership were fundamentally male domains. Despite the military's official policies promoting gender equality, Tank harbored deep reservations about women in command positions, especially in combat-related roles. As Tank dismissed his team and turned toward the equipment shed, he caught sight of Commander Martinez approaching with her aide. His eyes immediately focused on her rank insignia, and a familiar irritation began to build in his chest. Another female officer, probably some desk jockey from Washington who had never seen real action, coming to tell them how to do their jobs. Tank had encountered female officers before, and in his experience, they fell into two categories: those who were competent but had been promoted beyond their capabilities due to political correctness, and those who were genuinely qualified but tried too hard to prove themselves by being overly aggressive or demanding. Either way, he found their presence disruptive to the natural order of military hierarchy that he believed worked best when it followed traditional patterns. Sarah was reviewing her notes when she heard heavy footsteps approaching. She looked up to see the large SEAL instructor walking directly toward her, his expression already showing signs of disapproval. Something in his posture and the way he was looking at her rank insignia told Sarah that this encounter was not going to be pleasant. Tank stopped about 3 feet away from Commander Martinez, close enough to be somewhat intimidating, but not quite close enough to be formally insubordinate. His eyes swept over her uniform, taking in every detail with the practiced assessment of a professional soldier. When he spoke, his voice carried the rough edge of someone accustomed to giving orders to hardened warriors. "Well, well," Tank said, his Texas drawl thick with sarcasm. "Look what the Navy sent us today. Another desk commander coming to tell us how to fight wars from behind a computer screen." He crossed his arms over his broad chest, the gesture deliberately casual but clearly disrespectful. Lieutenant Torres immediately stepped forward, her young face flushing with anger at the obvious slight to her commanding officer. "Petty officer, you will show proper respect to Commander Martinez," she said sharply, her voice carrying all the authority her rank could muster. Tank's eyes flicked to Tor's with amusement. "Easy there, Lieutenant. I'm just making conversation with your boss here." He turned his attention back to Sarah, looking her up and down with deliberate slowness. "Commander, let me guess, intelligence, logistics, or maybe one of those new gender integration positions they're creating to make the politicians happy." Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she maintained her composure. She had dealt with men like Tank before, and she knew that reacting emotionally would only confirm whatever prejudices he already held. Instead, she decided to let him dig his own hole deeper. "Actually, petty officer," Sarah said calmly, reading his name tape. "I'm here to evaluate inter-service cooperation protocols. I trust you'll be professional enough to ensure your team contributes positively to that evaluation." Tank's eyebrows rose slightly at her use of his name, but he was far from finished. "Professional. Oh, I'm always professional, ma'am." The word ma'am came out with just enough emphasis to make it sound mocking. "I just find it interesting how many commanders we're getting these days who never actually commanded anything in a real fight. But hey, I'm sure you've got plenty of PowerPoint slides to show us about teamwork and cooperation." The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Several other service members in the area had stopped what they were doing to watch the exchange, sensing the tension building between the SEAL and the Navy commander. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed curious to see how the confrontation would play out. Sarah took a step closer to Tank, her voice remaining calm but taking on a steely edge that those who knew her recognized as a warning sign. "Petty officer, I'm going to give you one opportunity to reconsider your tone and approach. Your assumptions about my background and qualifications are not only incorrect but inappropriate for a professional military environment." Tank's confidence seemed to grow rather than diminish in the face of her warning. He had been in enough confrontations with superior officers to know how to walk the line between insubordination and aggressive assertiveness. In his mind, he was simply standing up for the standards and traditions that had made the SEALs the elite force they were. "With all due respect, Commander," Tank said, his voice dripping with false deference, "I've been doing this job for 8 years. I've seen combat in 4 different theaters, lost good men under fire, and pulled my teammates out of situations that would make most people wet themselves. So forgive me if I'm a little skeptical when someone shows up wearing commander's bars without any visible combat decorations to back them up." The crowd of onlookers had grown larger now, including several Marines and Army personnel who had been drawn by the raised voices and obvious tension. Among them was Staff Sergeant Maria, a Marine logistics specialist who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and had great respect for Commander Martinez based on stories she had heard through the military grapevine. Knew that Tank was making a serious mistake, but military protocol prevented her from intervening directly in a confrontation between a petty officer and a commander from another service. She could only watch and hope that Tank would come to his senses before he crossed a line that would have serious consequences for his career. Sarah looked around at the growing audience and made a decision. Rather than continue the confrontation in public, where it could escalate further and undermine discipline across multiple units, she decided to end the immediate situation while making it clear that Tank's behavior was unacceptable. "Petty officer," she said in a voice that carried across the courtyard, "report to the main conference room at 900 hours for the Joint Services briefing. I trust you'll conduct yourself with the professionalism expected of a Navy SEAL during that meeting." Tank's smile was cocky and self-satisfied. In his mind, he had successfully stood up to another politically promoted officer and made his point about maintaining standards. "Yes, ma'am," he said with exaggerated precision, snapping a salute that was technically correct but somehow managed to convey disrespect through its very perfection. As Tank walked away, several of his SEAL teammates gathered around him, some offering congratulations for putting the commander in her place, while others looked less certain about what they had just witnessed. The general consensus among Tank's supporters was that he had appropriately challenged what they saw as the military's growing tendency to promote women beyond their capabilities for political reasons. Sarah watched Tank's departure with a mixture of disappointment and grim determination. She had hoped that the military's efforts to promote professionalism and respect across all ranks had made more progress than this encounter suggested. However, she also knew that Tank's attitude was not uncommon, and that changing deeply held prejudices would take more than policy directives and sensitivity training. Lieutenant Torres approached her commanding officer with barely contained anger. "Ma'am, that was completely out of line. Should I file a formal complaint about his conduct?" Sarah considered the suggestion carefully. A formal complaint would certainly be justified and might result in disciplinary action against Tank. However, she also knew that such an action could be seen as confirmation that she couldn't handle disrespect without running to higher authorities, which could undermine her effectiveness with other skeptical personnel. "Not yet, Jessica," Sarah said finally. "Let's see how he conducts himself during the briefing. Sometimes these situations have a way of resolving themselves when people are given enough rope." What Tank didn't know, and what none of the onlookers could have guessed, was that Commander Sarah Martinez's personnel file contained information that was classified at the highest levels. Her combat decorations weren't visible on her dress uniform, because most of them were associated with operations that officially never happened, in places that the United States government would never acknowledge having military personnel. Sarah had spent 5 years attached to naval special warfare units in a capacity that required her to maintain a cover identity as an intelligence officer. During that time, she had participated in 17 classified operations across 3 continents, including 3 missions that had been considered so dangerous that they were staffed entirely by volunteers who understood they might not return home. The Silver Star she had earned during a rescue operation in Somalia was locked away in a classified file that Tank would never see. The Navy Cross that resulted from her actions during a hostage rescue in Southeast Asia would never be worn publicly, because acknowledging its existence would compromise ongoing intelligence operations. And the Purple Heart she had received after taking shrapnel during an extraction under fire was officially recorded as resulting from a training accident to protect operational security. More importantly, Tank had no way of knowing that Commander Martinez was personally known to some of the highest-ranking officers in the United States military, men who had worked with her in situations where political considerations took a back seat to pure competence and courage under fire. These officers knew exactly what Sarah Martinez was capable of, and they held her in the highest regard not because of her gender, but because of her exceptional performance in some of the most challenging circumstances the military could offer. As Sarah made her way into the administrative building to prepare for the morning briefing, she reflected on the irony of Tank's assumptions. He had accused her of being a political promotion, never imagining that her actual background was far more impressive than anything he could have guessed. The question now was whether he would continue his disrespectful behavior during the official proceedings, or whether he might begin to suspect that there was more to Commander Martinez than met the eye. The morning sun climbed higher over camp as personnel from all branches began filing into the main conference room for what was scheduled to be a routine briefing on inter-service cooperation. None of them could have predicted that this particular meeting would become a defining moment in the careers of everyone present, or that petty officer's arrogance was about to collide head-on with a reality he could never have imagined. The main conference room at camp filled quickly as personnel from all 4 branches of the military took their assigned seats. The room was designed to accommodate high-level briefings, with tiered seating that allowed everyone a clear view of the presentation area and multiple screens for displaying tactical information. American flags representing each service branch hung prominently along the walls, and the atmosphere was typically professional and focused. Commander Sarah Martinez entered the room precisely at 8:55 hours, 5 minutes before the scheduled start time. She had spent the intervening time reviewing the morning's intelligence reports and coordinating with the base commander about some logistical issues that had arisen during the night. Her aide, Lieutenant Torres, followed closely behind, carrying additional briefing materials and a secure tablet containing classified updates that might need to be addressed during the meeting. Tank was already seated in the 3rd row, surrounded by several of his SEAL teammates. He had positioned himself where he would have a clear view of the proceedings while remaining far enough back to make side comments without being easily overheard by the presenters. His body language remained relaxed and confident, showing no signs that his earlier confrontation with Commander Martinez had given him any cause for concern. Among the other attendees were Colonel Robert Henderson, a Marine officer with 22 years of experience who would be presenting the tactical coordination updates, Major Lisa Williams, an Army logistics specialist known for her innovative approaches to supply chain management, and Captain David Park, a Navy pilot who had been tasked with reviewing air support integration protocols. These officers represented the kind of competent, experienced leadership that the Joint Training Program was designed to foster. Also present were several senior non-commissioned officers from each branch, including Master Chief Petty Officer James, who served as the senior enlisted advisor for all Navy personnel at the facility, had 30 years of military experience, and had worked with some of the most elite units in the Navy. He had noticed Tank's disrespectful behavior earlier and was keeping a close eye on the young SEAL, knowing that such attitudes could quickly undermine the morale and effectiveness of joint operations. As the clock struck 900, Commander Martinez called the meeting to order. Her voice carried easily throughout the room, and her professional demeanor immediately established the serious tone that such briefings required. She began with a brief overview of the day's agenda and the objectives that higher command wanted to achieve through the inter-service cooperation initiatives. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah began. "Today's briefing will focus on evaluating our progress in 3 key areas: tactical coordination between special operations units, logistical integration across service boundaries, and communication protocols during joint exercises. Each of these areas represents a critical component of our military's ability to respond effectively to evolving threats worldwide." Tank shifted in his seat, already preparing to tune out what he expected to be another boring presentation full of bureaucratic terminology and politically correct objectives. In his experience, these types of briefings were typically led by officers who understood theory but lacked practical experience in the field. He glanced around at his teammates, several of whom shared his skeptical expression. Colonel Henderson took the podium first, presenting detailed information about recent exercises that had involved Marines working alongside Army Rangers and Navy SEALs. His presentation included video footage from training scenarios, statistical analysis of communication effectiveness, and recommendations for improving coordination protocols. Henderson was known for his direct, no-nonsense approach to military operations, and his briefing reflected years of practical experience in leading joint operations. During Henderson's presentation, Tank made several whispered comments to his nearby teammates about the overly complex nature of the coordination protocols being discussed. In his view, special operations worked best when units were given clear objectives and allowed to execute them with minimal interference from higher command. The elaborate coordination procedures being presented struck him as bureaucratic obstacles that would slow down operations rather than improve them. Major Williams followed with her logistics presentation, which included innovative approaches to supply chain management that had significantly improved efficiency in recent exercises. Her data showed how proper coordination between services could reduce response times and improve resource allocation, particularly in rapidly evolving tactical situations. Williams had earned her reputation through successful logistical support of operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, where her planning had directly contributed to mission success. As the presentations continued, Commander Martinez moved around the room, taking notes and asking penetrating questions that demonstrated her deep understanding of both the theoretical and practical aspects of joint operations. Her questions revealed familiarity with current tactical doctrine, awareness of recent operational challenges, and insight into the political and strategic context that shaped military planning. Tank began to pay closer attention as he realized that Commander Martinez's questions were far more sophisticated than he had expected. She asked Colonel Henderson about specific tactical scenarios that suggested personal familiarity with special operations procedures. Her questions to Major Williams revealed detailed knowledge of logistics challenges that typically only came from direct experience with field operations. The turning point came when Captain Park was discussing air support coordination protocols. Commander Martinez interrupted with a question about helicopter insertion procedures in hostile territory, specifically referencing a technical issue with radio frequency coordination that had caused problems during a recent classified operation. The specificity of her question surprised several officers in the room, including Tank, because the operational details she mentioned were known only to personnel who had direct involvement in special operations. "Captain Park," Commander Martinez said, "during the exercise simulation last month, there were reported difficulties with frequency between air support units and ground-based special operations teams. Can you address how the new protocols would prevent the kind of communication breakdown that led to the extraction delay? Captain Park looked momentarily surprised by the specificity of her question. Ma'am, I wasn't aware that the details of that particular exercise had been distributed to. Sarah smiled slightly. I was there, Captain, as an observer. The communication breakdown added 47 minutes to what should have been a routine extraction and put the ground team at unnecessary risk. A murmur ran through the room as the implications of Commander Martinez's statement began to sink in. For her to have been present as an observer at a special operations exercise meant that her security clearance and operational involvement were far higher than her apparent administrative role would suggest. Tank felt the first stirring of unease as he began to reconsider his assumptions about Commander Martinez. The exercises that Captain Park was discussing were highly classified, involving only the most elite units, and requiring special authorization for any observers. The fact that she had not only been present, but had retained detailed knowledge of specific technical problems suggested a level of involvement that went well beyond a typical staff officer's responsibilities. Master Chief, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, noticed Tank's change in demeanor and felt a grim satisfaction. Had served long enough to recognize when junior personnel were about to learn difficult lessons about making assumptions based on incomplete information. He had seen Tank's type before competent operators who let their egos override their judgment and ended up embarrassing themselves and their units. The briefing continued with Commander Martinez asking increasingly detailed questions that demonstrated not only theoretical knowledge, but practical experience with the challenges facing joint operations. She referenced specific equipment limitations, discussed personnel integration issues with the authority of someone who had dealt with them personally, and offered suggestions that reflected deep understanding of how different military cultures could be successfully combined. During a break in the proceedings, Tank found himself in whispered conversation with his teammates. The confidence he had displayed earlier was beginning to show cracks as he tried to reconcile his preconceptions about Commander Martinez with the evidence of competence she was displaying during the briefing. Something's not right about this, Tank muttered to Petty Officer Second Class, one of his most trusted teammates. Staff officers don't know that kind of operational detail unless. Who was more perceptive than Tank gave him credit for had already reached the same conclusion. Unless she's not really a staff officer, finished quietly. Tank, I think you might have stepped in it this morning. Tank's jaw tightened as he considered the possibility that his earlier confrontation with Commander Martinez might have been based on fundamentally flawed assumptions. However, his pride and his deeply held beliefs about military hierarchy made it difficult for him to fully accept that he might have been wrong. Instead, he convinced himself that even if Commander Martinez had more operational experience than he had initially thought, his basic point about women in command positions was still valid. The briefing resumed with a discussion of future training exercises and evaluation criteria for measuring the success of inter-service cooperation initiatives. Commander Martinez took the lead in this portion of the meeting, outlining specific objectives and timelines with the authority of someone accustomed to operational planning. Her presentation was crisp, professional, and demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that impressed even the most senior officers present. As Commander Martinez spoke about upcoming exercises, Tank found himself paying closer attention to the details she provided. Her knowledge of personnel capabilities, equipment limitations, and tactical considerations was far more comprehensive than any staff officer should possess. Moreover, her comfort with discussing classified operations and her apparent familiarity with special operations procedures suggested a background that was significantly different from what Tank had assumed. The meeting was interrupted when Lieutenant Torres received an urgent message on her secure communication device. She approached Commander Martinez discreetly and whispered something that caused Sarah to nod and excuse herself briefly from the proceedings. As she stepped out of the room to take what was obviously a high-priority call, Tank noticed that several of the senior officers seemed unsurprised by the interruption, as if they were accustomed to Commander Martinez receiving urgent communications during routine meetings. Tank's unease continued to grow as he observed the respect and deference that other senior officers showed toward Commander Martinez. Colonel Henderson, who was known for his direct and sometimes abrasive personality, spoke to her with the kind of professional courtesy typically reserved for officers whose competence and authority were unquestioned. Major Williams sought her input on logistics questions with the attitude of someone consulting a recognized expert, rather than merely briefing a superior officer. When Commander Martinez returned to the meeting, she brought news that would further complicate Tank's understanding of the situation. "Ladies she announced, "I've just been informed that we'll be receiving some distinguished visitors this afternoon. 4 general officers will be arriving to observe our afternoon exercise and receive briefings on our progress with inter-service integration." The announcement created a stir throughout the room, as visits from multiple general officers were relatively rare and typically indicated that the activities at camp were receiving attention at the highest levels of military command. Tank wondered why such high-ranking officers would be interested in what was supposed to be a routine training evaluation, and why Commander Martinez seemed unsurprised by their impending arrival. Master Chief leaned forward in his chair, his expression becoming more serious as he considered the implications of the general officer's visit. In his experience, when multiple generals showed up unannounced, it usually meant that either something had gone very wrong or something very important was happening that required their personal attention. Either way, it suggested that the day's events were far more significant than most of the attendees had realized. As the briefing concluded, and personnel began filing out to prepare for the afternoon exercises, Tank found himself struggling with growing doubts about his earlier behavior. The evidence was mounting that Commander Martinez was not the politically promoted desk officer he had assumed her to be, but rather someone with genuine operational experience and connections at the highest levels of military command. However, Tank's pride and his fundamental beliefs about military hierarchy made it difficult for him to fully acknowledge his mistake. Instead, he decided to maintain his skeptical attitude while watching more carefully for additional clues about Commander Martinez's true background and qualifications. He was about to learn that some assumptions, once made public, cannot be quietly abandoned without consequences. The afternoon sun was climbing toward its peak as personnel across camp prepared for what promised to be one of the most closely watched training exercises in recent memory. Tank was about to discover that his morning confrontation with Commander Martinez had set in motion a series of events that would fundamentally change his understanding of military leadership, respect, and the dangerous consequences of judging others based on assumptions rather than facts. The afternoon heat shimmered off the tarmac as 4 military helicopters approached camp's main landing zone. Word had spread quickly through the base that multiple general officers were arriving for an unscheduled visit, creating an atmosphere of heightened attention and nervous energy among personnel across all branches. Senior officers hurried to ensure their units were prepared for inspection, while junior personnel speculated about the reason for such high-level interest in what was supposed to be a routine training evaluation. Tank stood with his SEAL team near the equipment staging area, watching the helicopters touch down with growing apprehension. His earlier confidence had been steadily eroding throughout the morning as he observed Commander Martinez's obvious competence and the respect she commanded from other senior officers. The arrival of multiple generals suggested that the day's events were far more significant than he had realized, and Tank was beginning to suspect that his confrontational behavior might have more serious consequences than he had anticipated. The first helicopter disgorged General Hayes, a 4-star Army general who served as the deputy chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. At 55, General Hayes was one of the most respected officers in the entire military, with a distinguished career that included combat commands in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Her presence alone indicated that whatever was happening at camp had attracted attention at the highest levels of Pentagon leadership. From the second helicopter emerged General Michael, a 3-star Marine Corps general who commanded all Special Operations Forces on the East Coast. General had worked extensively with SEAL teams, Delta Force, and other elite units, and his reputation for demanding excellence was legendary throughout the Special Operations community. Tank recognized him immediately and felt his stomach tighten as he realized that his earlier disrespect toward Commander Martinez might have been witnessed by personnel who reported directly to General. The third helicopter brought General James Mitchell, a four-star Air Force general responsible for joint tactical operations across multiple theaters. General Mitchell had been instrumental in developing many of the inter-service cooperation protocols that were being evaluated at camp, and his presence suggested that the day's exercises were more than routine training events. The final helicopter carried the most surprising visitor of all, General David, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the highest-ranking military officer in the United States. General's presence at camp was unprecedented for a routine training evaluation, and his arrival sent shock waves through the assembled personnel. When the chairman of the Joint Chiefs shows up unannounced, it means that whatever is being evaluated has implications for national security policy at the highest levels. Tank watched in growing amazement as the four generals walked across the tarmac toward the main administrative building. Each man represented decades of military experience and held positions of enormous responsibility within the American defense establishment. Their collective presence suggested that Commander Martinez's evaluation was far more important than anyone had realized, and Tank began to wonder if there were aspects of the situation that he had completely failed to understand. Commander Sarah Martinez was waiting at the base commander's office when the four generals arrived. She stood at attention as they entered, her posture reflecting years of military discipline and her expression revealing nothing of the emotions she might be feeling at this reunion with officers she had worked with in various capacities over the years. General Hayes spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command at the highest levels. "Sarah, it's good to see you again. I trust the evaluation is proceeding according to schedule." The casual use of Commander Martinez's first name by the deputy chairman of the Joint Chiefs sent another shock through the junior officers present. Such informal address between a four-star general and a Navy commander suggested a personal relationship that went well beyond normal military hierarchy, indicating either family connections or shared experiences that created bonds of mutual respect and trust. General stepped forward next, extending his hand to Commander Martinez with obvious warmth and respect. "Commander Martinez, I've been looking forward to your report on the joint training protocols. Your insights from the Somalia operation have been invaluable in developing our current procedures." The reference to Somalia created an immediate stir among the listening officers. Somalia was synonymous with some of the most dangerous and classified special operations of recent years, and the fact that Commander Martinez had played a significant enough role to influence current training protocols suggested operational experience at the highest levels of special warfare. General Mitchell added his greetings with equal warmth, referencing a joint operation in Southeast Asia that had resulted in significant intelligence breakthroughs. His comments made it clear that Commander Martinez had been involved in multiple classified operations across different theaters, working directly with general officers in situations that demanded the highest levels of competence and reliability. Finally, General approached Commander Martinez with an expression that combined professional respect with personal affection. "Sarah, congratulations on your promotion. The President specifically asked me to convey his appreciation for your service during the hostage rescue operation last year. Your tactical recommendations were crucial to the mission's success." The mention of presidential recognition and involvement in a hostage rescue operation sent another wave of shock through the assembled officers. Hostage rescue operations were among the most dangerous and politically sensitive missions undertaken by American forces, typically involving only the most elite personnel and requiring approval at the highest levels of government. Tank, who had positioned himself where he could observe the proceedings, felt his world begin to collapse around him as the implications of what he was witnessing became clear. Commander Martinez was not a politically promoted desk officer, but rather someone with operational experience at the highest levels of special operations, someone who had worked directly with the most senior officers in the American military, and someone whose competence and judgment were trusted by the President of the United States. The group of generals and Commander Martinez moved to the main conference room, where a detailed briefing had been prepared on the progress of inter-service cooperation initiatives. As they walked, their conversation revealed additional details about Commander Martinez's background that further undermined Tank's earlier assumptions. General Hayes mentioned Commander Martinez's role in developing new intelligence integration protocols that had improved coordination between CIA operatives and military special operations units. General referenced her tactical innovations during urban warfare operations that had been adopted as standard procedures for Marine Special Operations units. General Mitchell praised her contributions to air-ground coordination techniques that had saved American lives in multiple theaters. The cumulative effect of these revelations was to paint a picture of an officer whose experience, competence, and contributions to American national security were far beyond anything Tank could have imagined. Commander Martinez was revealed to be not just a competent naval officer, but one of the most accomplished special operations officers of her generation, someone whose expertise was sought by the highest levels of military and political leadership. As the briefing began, Tank found himself in an impossible position. His earlier disrespectful behavior toward Commander Martinez had been witnessed by multiple personnel who were now observing the obvious respect and deference shown to her by four of the most senior officers in the American military. The contrast between his morning arrogance and the current reality was so stark that it could not be ignored or explained away. Master Chief, who had been watching Tank's growing discomfort with grim satisfaction, approached the young SEAL with an expression that mixed disappointment with concern. "Petty officer, I think you and I need to have a serious conversation about what happened this morning." Tank's face was pale as he turned to face the Master Chief, knowing that his career was likely about to take a dramatic turn for the worse. "Master Chief, I held up a hand to stop Tank's attempted explanation. "Son, do you have any idea who you disrespected this morning? Do you understand what Commander Martinez has accomplished in service to this country?" Before Tank could respond, Lieutenant Torres appeared at his elbow with a message that sent his anxiety to new heights. "Petty officer, you're requested in the main conference room immediately. The generals want to meet you." The walk to the conference room felt like the longest of Tank's life. He knew that whatever was about to happen, it would likely define the remainder of his military career. His earlier confidence and arrogance had been completely replaced by growing dread as he contemplated facing four general officers who had just demonstrated their high regard for the woman he had insulted that morning. The conference room fell silent as Tank entered and came to attention in front of the assembled senior officers. The four generals sat at the main table with Commander Martinez, their expressions ranging from curious to stern as they examined the SEAL who had reportedly shown disrespect to one of their most valued colleagues. General spoke first, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command at the highest levels. "Petty officer, I understand you had an encounter with Commander Martinez this morning. Would you care to explain your behavior?" Tank swallowed hard, knowing that his response could make the difference between salvaging his career and facing serious disciplinary action. "Sir, I made assumptions about Commander Martinez's qualifications based on incomplete information. My behavior was inappropriate and unprofessional." The admission was accurate but inadequate, and Tank knew it. He had not simply made a mistake. He had demonstrated prejudice, disrespect, and poor judgment that called into question his fitness for continued service with elite units. General leaned forward, his expression stern. "Petty officer, Commander Martinez has risked her life in service to this country more times than you can imagine. She has demonstrated courage, competence, and leadership under conditions that would test any warrior. Your assumptions about her qualifications were not just wrong. They were based on prejudices that have no place in the modern military." General Hayes added her perspective with the authority of someone who had broken barriers throughout her own career. "Son, Commander Martinez has earned her rank through performance that exceeds the standards expected of any officer, male or female. Her contributions to special operations have saved American lives and advanced our national security interests in ways that remain classified." General Mitchell's comments focused on the broader implications of Tank's behavior. "Petty officer, your attitude represents the kind of thinking that undermines unit cohesion and effectiveness. When you prejudge an officer's capabilities based on gender rather than performance, you weaken the entire force." As the generals spoke, Tank began to understand the full scope of his mistake. He had not simply insulted a fellow officer. He had demonstrated the kind of prejudiced thinking that the military had been working for decades to eliminate. His behavior had called into question not only his own professionalism, but potentially the training and culture of his entire unit. Commander Martinez herself had remained silent during the general's comments, but now she spoke with quiet authority. Petty officer, I accept your apology for this morning's behavior. However, I want you to understand that this is not about personal disrespect to me. This is about maintaining the standards of professionalism that allow our military to function effectively in challenging situations. The moment that would become legendary throughout camp came when General stood and addressed Commander Martinez directly. Sarah, thank you for your continued service and your contributions to this evaluation. Your recommendations will be implemented across all joint training programs. As General spoke, something remarkable happened. All four generals rose simultaneously from their chairs, came to attention, and rendered sharp, precise salutes to Commander Martinez. The sight of the four highest-ranking officers in the American military saluting a Navy commander created a moment of absolute silence in the room, broken only by the sound of heels clicking together as Tank automatically came to attention. The salutes were not merely ceremonial courtesies between officers of different ranks. They represented recognition of exceptional service, acknowledgement of personal respect, and tribute to achievements that went far beyond normal expectations. When the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and three other four-star generals salute together, they are making a statement that transcends ordinary military protocol. Tank stood frozen as he watched this unprecedented display of respect for the woman he had mocked just hours earlier. The contrast between his morning arrogance and the reality unfolding before him was so complete that it left him speechless and deeply ashamed. He had ridiculed someone who commanded the respect of the most senior officers in the American military, someone whose service record included achievements that most warriors could only dream of accomplishing. Commander Martinez returned the salutes with quiet dignity, her expression revealing nothing of whatever emotions she might be experiencing. When the formal courtesies were completed, General addressed Tank one final time. Petty officer, you have witnessed something that few military personnel ever see, the unanimous respect of the Joint Chiefs for an officer whose service has been exceptional by any measure. I trust this experience will help you understand the importance of judging your fellow warriors by their performance rather than your preconceptions. As the generals filed out of the conference room, Tank remained standing at attention, his mind reeling from the magnitude of what he had witnessed. The woman he had dismissed as a politically promoted desk officer had just received salutes from four of the most powerful military leaders in the world, leaders who clearly regarded her as someone whose contributions to American national security were beyond question. Master Chief approached Tank as the room emptied, his expression mixing disappointment with hope for redemption. Son, you've just learned one of the most important lessons a military person can learn. Never judge a warrior's worth by anything other than their performance under fire. Commander Martinez has proven herself in ways that most of us can only imagine. Tank's voice was barely above a whisper as he replied, Master Chief, I've never been more wrong about anything in my life. How do I make this right? His response would stay with Tank for the rest of his career. You make it right by ensuring that you never again let prejudice override your professional judgment. You make it right by becoming the kind of warrior who earns respect through performance, not attitude. And you make it right by remembering that the measure of a true professional is not whether they make mistakes, but how they respond when they discover those mistakes. As Tank walked away from the conference room, he carried with him a lesson that would fundamentally change his approach to military service and his understanding of leadership. He had learned that respect is earned through performance, that assumptions can be dangerous, and that true warriors come in all forms. Most importantly, he had learned that the highest levels of military leadership recognized and valued excellence regardless of gender, and that his own prejudices had nearly cost him the opportunity to serve alongside some of America's finest warriors. The afternoon sun was beginning to set over camp as Tank began the difficult but necessary process of examining his beliefs, confronting his prejudices, and recommitting himself to the standards of professionalism that had made the American military the most effective fighting force in the world. The woman he had mocked that morning had taught him lessons about respect, leadership, and military excellence that would serve him for the remainder of his career, if he was wise enough to learn from them.